2 days after the cabinet cleared an ordinance to revamp laws on rape and sexual assault, President Pranab Mukherjee has signed it this afternoon, which means it is now the law. It will of course have to be ratified by Parliament within 6 months. The presidential assent comes in spite of calls by women's organizations to him not to sign this. Women's groups have called the ordinance a betrayal, asking why it doesn't include some key recommendations made by the Justice Verma panel. Well, joining me to discuss this now in the studio is Brinda Karat from the CPM. Brinda, thanks very much for joining us in studio. The CPM disapproved of this ordinance. The president has now gone ahead and signed it. Your reactions to this, essentially?
Well, I know that there has been some, request to the president not to sign it, but I don't think we should get diverted into that because the president was going to sign it. But really the reason why my party has disapproved of it is because not only has this ordinance been highly selective, but by being highly selective, it has actually set a very narrow agenda for Parliament. Because once you bring an ordinance, what tends to happen in Parliament is the debate now is not going to be on the Verma committee recommendations as it should have been. It's going to be on this absolutely truncated version of the Verma committee recommendations, which, as you have very rightly said, leaves out such important areas and really just tinkers with it. Because as you know, there's already a criminal law amendment bill pending before Parliament. In fact, it's so surprising to me, and that's why, one really questions the government's intentions, because the NCW draft had actually mentioned stalking, it had mentioned groping, it had mentioned the degrees of sexual assault, which the government had rejected in its official bill.
Right.
And now, in the ordinance, after having rejected the NCW draft, it brings it in the ordinance. So what are the kind of games the government's playing? One is really at a loss to understand why, when Parliament is going to meet 3 weeks down the line, you bring a truncated version of a very, very important report and you place a narrow agenda before Parliament. So basically what the government is saying is, this is what we think should be the law, and forget the other recommendations of Verma.
Right, but Ms. Karat, we were also told, especially on critical issues, I know the CPM raised AFSPA and the inclusion of sexual crimes by armed forces as a crucial element that should be included. Issues of marital rape, political candidates with crimes charged of such crimes, many of these have been left out. You're saying that this ordinance places a narrow agenda, but the party and the government has said that it is still open to further amendments. So how does that
You see, what
out?
happens is when an ordinance is placed, the discussion tends to be in and around that ordinance. So all the other basic issues which the government has already categorized as being controversial and not urgent will tend to get left out. Because the other aspect is you really have to look at the political will of this government. Why has it moved an ordinance? That's what I question. Because there's nothing in this ordinance which warrants, except for a political point the government wants to make, there's nothing in this ordinance which warrants, going ahead with this when Parliament's going to meet. Therefore, my question is, if you really had the political will, you should have removed the Police Commissioner of Delhi. That's what the Verma Committee has recommended. You should have increased punishment for police officials and public servants who are not doing their duty, for dereliction of duty. And most definitely, we should have brought the armed forces under the criminal laws of this country. If you had done that, then the state culpability, which has been pointed out in the Verma Commission recommendations, could have been focused, and Parliament would have an opportunity, to discuss the other issues.
So can one expect that there will be some intelligent debate in Parliament going forward, that this ordinance will actually be tweaked further when it goes to our elected representatives?
Well, that's exactly the problem. We're talking about tweaking an ordinance instead of discussing in full an excellent comprehensive report and having the law amended for that. So here we are already talking about tweaking an ordinance, and you're quite right. That's all that's going to happen. And that's why my party has thoroughly disapproved of this and said it's doing a gross injustice to both women's issues, women's security, and the recommendations of the Verma Committee.
So one can expect a stormy session coming up, given that there is
well,
going
I
to
hope
start.
that, I hope this is important enough for MPs to make it a stormy session.
Right.
I just hope it's not the silence of the grave as far as security of women issues
in this country is concerned. Pranab, thanks very much, and that's all we have time for. Thanks very much for joining us. We're also, of course, going to be debating this in the studio right now with other political leaders and guests that we have. Manishankar Iyer from the Congress Party, Jay Panda from the BJD, and also Shaina NC of the BJP. Manishankar Iyer, let's come across to you first. The Congress seems to have been well-intentioned. Many would argue in the cabinet having pushed through this ordinance, Pranab Mukherjee signing it today, but a lot of angry voices about why certain crucial recommendations have been left out. What is your reaction to the criticism?
Well, my reaction is that we were under considerable pressure to produce a law as quickly as we could. And we've had to do it by way of an ordinance in order to fulfill our assurances to the nation. And of course, an ordinance has to be placed on the table of the House. And that will give the opportunity for these voices, what we call the angry voices of civil society, to be channeled through the Parliament to the ears of the government. And there are procedures for proposing amendments, suggesting additions, and I'm sure all that will be done. So I suspect that the eventual shape of the law will be somewhat different to the ordinance as it is now. But I think the ordinance does represent proof of the good intentions of the government.
India's #1 news app just got even better. Download NDTV's new app. Fully optimized for retina display. Full screen view. Faster response time, and Sudoku. NDTV's new iPad app. Download now.